Hi everyone. Thank you for coming to the last Holloway reading of the fall semester. This will also be the last reading that I will be a curator for the time being, and I just wanted to thank a few people for helping me put this series together. I'd like to thank Jill Marie, Grace, Catherine, and Dana. All of you have been absolutely fabulous in helping organizing these readings. So we have a great night, we have a fantastic night, and thank you for coming. I know we nearly averted a tsunami, and thank God. Luckily, we're all here in this room waiting to hear Daniel read and Erica Higbee. So I just wanted to give you the itinerary for tonight. Erica Higbee will be reading first. She will be introduced by D. Ramos Estrada. And then afterwards, Mitch Christensen will be introducing Daniel Borzutzky. Daniel Borzutzky will be reading for 30 minutes. Afterwards, he will do a 15-minute Q&A. Please buy a book. The books are sold in the back. Daniel will do a little book signing afterwards, okay? So right now, I would like to introduce Dee.
So I think the genre of introducing people is really hard, so I'm just going to preface it with that I don't really know what this document is. I was just trying to show Erica some love, right? So I'll start off by thanking Kathy, Cecil, and Catherine, and everyone who worked together to put the series on this semester, and just express happiness to be introducing Erica. This introduction was difficult to write because I could go on forever about how much I love her. So I hope the impressions which follow will at least convey that. I can't quite pinpoint when Erica and I became close friends, maybe because I didn't really anticipate it. We started graduate school the same year, but I was hardly present then, and the first couple of years were kind of a blur. On top of the generalized social havoc wrought by COVID, I had just broken up with my college sweetheart, and I was depressed, smoking a lot, drinking a lot. While I luxuriated in the pathos of what remained of the pandemic, Erica organized a group of us to regularly participate in jail support with APTP, the Anti-Police Terror Project. On Thursday evenings from 7 a.m. to midnight, a group of us would wait with snacks, clothes, phone chargers, and BART passes for people being released from Santa Rita jail. A lot of interactions were heartening, like that one guy, still wearing the same Warriors jersey from the night he got booked at the Chase Center. He loved James Patterson novels. It was all he read for 6 months. We exchanged a lot of jokes, but I can't remember any of them. Other times, the shifts were intense, and I always marveled at how much of a leader Erica could be in difficult moments. One time, there was a woman who was obviously going through withdrawal symptoms. The lady was panicking, moaning incoherently, but undoubtedly in a lot of pain. We did our best to find something that could keep her warm, debated whether or not we should take her to the hospital. Erica volunteered immediately, no hesitation, and drove her home with another one of our friends in the department, Drew. When they got back, Erica was crying hard, saying they just tossed her out. How could they just toss her out? I hadn't seen much emoting from folks in the department, whether it was first year fronting or a dulling of the senses symptomatic of the pandemic era. When I saw her, I remember thinking how strong she seemed. It was one of the many times I've seen her work through big feelings that have resulted from her heroic sense of empathy, always nuancing the contours of justice, even in times when her own safety was at risk. Now, yes, Erica is a deeply sensitive person, and I think that's what makes her a good builder of community, but she's not a punk, and I think that's what makes her a good scholar, or at least an interesting one. I've been in a lot of classes with her, and I can tell you that she's an incisive academic. My first impressions of Erica, the academic, were that she was intense, and she was, in her heart of hearts, a real writer. She once went in on a Zoom chat, hashing out this prolonged critique about Kathleen Stewart and Lauren Berlant's book, The Hundreds, a rant to which Stephen Best could only reply, "Damn, Erica." She's been the colleague I've most respected in grad school, but it's only been in the last couple of years that I finally understood her funny, her own personal brand of humor, part deadpan, part goofy girl boss, and in understanding, and in having understood what made her fun, like what made her laugh, what she delighted in. Only now do I truly consider her to be one of my closest friends. We took a recent trip to Shelter Cove recently, thinking it would be a nice way to start off the semester, banging our heads against our work desks, taking walks along an inhospitable ocean, and eating at, quote, the world's most remote brewery, Jippo Ale Mill, 3 times a day. During that trip, Erica patiently walked me through my beef with poets. Yes, I have beef with poets, especially those hemmed in on all sides by an academic institution. I think a lot of people just want to be famous. A lot of my friends are poets, and yet on principle, over the course of my training as a graduate student at Berkeley, I've grown more and more suspicious of poetry's institutionalization. In a world of Stegners, it seems to me we are, as the kids say, cooked. Where are the understated, unsung bards of yore? And could we recognize them if they were right in front of our faces? Anyway, what does it even mean to be a superstar poet anymore? What does it mean to be a poet when no one reads poetry? And maybe the real question to ask is, what can poetry do? What can poetry help us do? What can it help us conceptualize? These are questions that I know Erica has been working through as a teacher this very semester in her feminist poetry class. Her pedagogy of tenderness informs her research, but it also extends to her friends. And I have learned so much from you, from just watching you be you, you know? I'll finish off with some words, or really just one word that I think really encapsulates Erica as an organizer, scholar, teacher, and yes, poet. It's precisely this idea of tenderness. Tender as in delicate, sensitive, but also capable of stretching, making an offering expansive. Stein was informative for her when she was a wee lass, but I hope you can listen tonight for a materialist ethics of touch, a materialist ethics of haptics that runs throughout her poetry. I won't ruin the lines exactly, but here are some tender images you might keep an eye out for. Worn love letters with ironic hiding places, words sewn into flesh, a la Spillers, always Spillers. The way one's mouth moves different when speaking in your native tongue, whatever native tongue means to someone whose identity has always been formed in flight. And my personal favorite, a tree in an uncertain landscape that sinks with the weight of words unsaid. Tenderness. Please help me in welcoming Erica Higby.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dee. I'm so happy that I can enter into this reading with your brilliant and incisive and loving framing of it and poetry. Thank you, Catherine and Kathy and Cecil, for organizing a great semester for the Holloway series. And it's a pleasure to read with you, Daniel. And under better circumstances than the last East Bay Booksellers event. These two or three poems I offer today, two very short and one very long, arrive from a project where I'm thinking about the articulation of witness and witnessing and staying with Teresa Hawking Chaw's dictate, and thinking about story and collecting oral histories of my family in and from Vietnam, working through their recountings of what happened there. that often really clash with one another. So I offer these to you, and hope you enjoy. Vietnam, 1945, 1948, 1975. Blame the willow trees standing in mourning, and the wind heavy with wet fog weighing more than any of the words we have misting in our mouths. We don't talk about the fall, how in the logic of nation, someone's fall is another's triumph, though tree branches begin to remind us of thin bone. If the country was divided into two, it was not because of us. Just look at the mountains, so cold, so flooded, with visions of freedom cradled on the small of a back, or a pendulum rests swinging our eyes, left and right and left and rubber tree plantation story. 1. They say Vietnam's rubber trees arrived in 1897. Raoul, a French pharmacist, dropped off a bag of hevea seeds to Saigon Botanical Garden on his way to Indonesia, where he was bringing the same seeds, and thereby the same era of history. 2. A magnolia growing in size blooms so suddenly in my mouth, causes my mouth to open. 3. In order to make the rubber tree plantations, they plundered the land and forced the trees into rows. My mother speaks of running between the gaps. My mother speaks of bulls at the foot of the trees, waiting for milky latex to drip down. 3. My mother and I argue over what the appropriate amount of anger in my body should be upon remembering how she forgave a boy for taking things too far with me when I was 15. I say something like, "You wouldn't understand, Mother, something like this hasn't happened to you." And then my mother tells me about what happened to her in Vietnam's rubber trees. 3. My mother places a bowl at the foot of my body, teaches me to wait for time to tap the anger out of me until I'm leaking. 4. The Michelin rubber plantation established outside of Saigon in 1917 required the United States to compensate for any damage to any rubber trees during its war. In 1975, Vietnamese communists used rubber tree plantations as hideouts, already knowing then that Americans would protect sites of profit over the bodies. 5. My uncle says the banyan trees in Vietnam grew wet and bulbous flowers that projected outward into the light. The flowers, he said, had a small opening that children liked to blow into to create little balloons that popped and made mischievous noise in afternoon sun. 6. They said Vietnam would be perfect for growing rubber trees. Raoul tells Jean-Pierre, who created Saigon Botanical Garden, to study the ways in which plants could be made to invade a country. Colonial scientists had little interest developing native plants that the locals had spent years harvesting. Jean-Pierre failed to grow rubber trees for 20 years. 7. They wanted trees' arms bleeding white. They wanted latex in Vietnam's highlands. They wanted to abstract children's afternoons, their enjoyment of sound. They wanted to dig up a place on a map halfway between a border and a city where instead they dug up memory and scattered it into a million whispers, one of which burst my eardrum open, a rupture. 8. They wanted my mother to turn into a ghost. My mother held on to her body. 9. The August Revolution, resulting in the end of French colonial rule in Vietnam, began underneath a banyan tree in 1945. It is believed the oldest of Vietnam's banyan trees have witnessed 1,000 years of history. Banyan trees grow many aerial roots that look like dozens of anchoring arms. 1. They say people who went to work for the rubber never came back. They won't talk about what happened to the woman and to the girls. 2. In 1977, when my mother was 23, she worked for the local newspaper in Saigon. The editor-in-chief recommended that she come to the rubber trees to help him report on the dead. I cannot speak of what she told me. I can only speak of the sun setting. I can only speak of rows of rubber trees in the dark, how easily a voice is lost in a forest, halfway between a border and a city. 3. These are the details, real, localized, isolated. These are the details, globalized, generalized. 4. My uncle recalls to me how my grandfather loved Dante's Divine Comedy and that he would sketch the circles of hell in a notebook. My uncle says loudly, "In my youth, I saw that my father reproduced someone else's story, but I drew my own story. I sketched my own life. I sketched the gate of my house." 5. They wanted to say it was all an accident. They wanted my uncle's arms tapping a knife into a tree under a sun they made menace. They wanted percepticide. They wanted their prophet, that pounding and fatal pace, slipping quietly through the bedroom door to take the story away. They wanted selective framing. They wanted to say it was all an accident. They wanted to pretend that accidents were not what was required. 6. Today I tell a story, but only for the listener to say, I don't know if I am your audience. Today I write a story, but only wishing to guide you out of it. 7. In the chasm between, I graft a narrative out of cuttings, magnolias out of rubber, branches out of bone, and I keep growing the story that fills with the specter of the 1,000 bodies of my mother. 8. O banyan tree, must we speak of the men in the story that forced the woman to inherit a violence? O banyan tree, I am here in the arms you grew to anchor our unfolding across history. I want to hold you back. I want my arms spreading outward indefinitely, as if to shade. 9. O magnolia tree, let us be haunted. Let us bend toward the partial story. Let your magnolias stretch our mouths open to make mischievous sound, to make a story whole enough so we ourselves can cut from it and otherwise. Teeth tap tongue. Mother taps back. Wind inside. Teeth. Mother hums song. The. Bé ơi. The. Bé ơi.
Good evening, everyone. Y buenas noches a todos. My name is Mitch Christensen, and I am second year PhD here in the English department. As a fellow Midwesterner, it is my pleasure to be the one to introduce Chicago-based poet and translator Daniel Borzutzky, who will be reading tonight. Borzutzky's books of poetry most recently include The Murmuring Grief of the Americas, written after a massacre in the year 2018, Lake Michigan, which was a finalist for the Griffin International Poetry Prize, and his 2016 collection, The Performance of Becoming Human, which won the National Book Award. His Spanish language translation work is just as prolific and awarded, as he has most recently translated Chilean poets Cecilia Vicuña's The Deer Book and Paula Ilbaca Núñez's The Loose Pearl, the latter of which received the 2023 PEN American Award for Poetry in Translation. Additionally, he has translated works by Galo Chigliotto, Raúl Zorita, and Jamie Louise Wenyun. He is a professor at the University of Illinois Chicago, where he holds a joint appointment in English and Latin American and Latino Studies, as well as serves as the director of the Center for Latinx Literature of the Americas. I have personally seen the impact of Borzutzky's work with undergraduate students here at Berkeley. Last academic year, I worked as a reader in a Latinx poetry class in which students were assigned a selection from The Performance of Becoming Human. The poem in particular was In the Blazing Cities of Your Rotten Carcass Mouth. More so than any other poetry we had read and discussed, students reacted visibly to Borzutzky's iconoclastic voice, that becoming human occurs at the level of speech performance, and his attention to language and even poetry as operating as forms of resistance as well as violence. In the poem, Borzutzky reflexively invokes the ambivalence of poetic labor. Quote, "This poem would be better if it took place in the saloon of Grand Fortune. It would be better if a man jumped off the bar and onto my back as I was reciting it. This poem would be better with just the right amount of sex, alcohol, violence, and 1950s border noir," unquote. These evocated improvements conjure at once the taste of literary markets for Latinx poetry, its themes, its geographic orientation, its preferable forms of subjectivity, as well as the role of MFA and writing programs to aestheticize experiences of violence or pain. I'm thinking particularly of, quote, Imagination Challenge number 1 and Imagination Challenge number 2, unquote, in the poem. They challenge both the reader and the poetic subject to intake violence and then, quote, write a sonnet or a villanelle about this experience and do not use adjectives. Write it in the second person. Publish it someplace good, unquote. Borzutzky's poetry serves as a strong reminder that though literature may be able to disrupt and criticize neoliberalism and systems of power, it is not innocent, and we should consider the academy and each writer's position in systems of violence, dispossession, and disempowerment. If I may be so bold as to venture, one helpful foil for Borzutzky's work is the Chicago School of Economics. The origin of persistent trends and policies of neoliberalism and global capitalism. Originating in the 1950s and 1960s, the Chicago School describes a group of influential economists at the eponymously named universities such as Milton Friedman and George Stigler. This group helped to define a new reaffirmation of classical or free market economic beliefs and influenced global institutions such as the World Bank and IMF. Borzutzky's experiences in Santiago, Chile, under the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship led him to consider and follow the connective tissue back to the US, and in particular, the Chicago School's role as, quote, the economic brain behind the dictatorship, behind the dictatorship's mass privatizations, unquote. I know that the aforementioned World Bank provided loans and backing to the Pinochet regime, generating the superficial success or Chilean miracle of neoliberal policies in terms of fast economic growth that came at the expense of social inequality. Yet the same financial support was denied to the previous democratically elected government of Salvador Allende. Thus, Chile specifically, and at a wider scale, Latin America, operated as a sort of lab or case study for the US and the Western world to then utilize neoliberal practices and methods of control such as mass deportation, public school closure, and the encouragement of anti-immigrant rhetoric and violence that Borzutzky found all too familiar in Chicago. There is an urgency and revelatory pulse to Borzutzky's poetry. It provides a new and radical knowledge that seeks to flow counter to the global horizons of the late capitalist immiseration. And in the process, his poetry transforms the boundaries of Latinx and contemporary American poetry. So, without further ado, I'm happy to introduce Daniel Borzutzky.
Thank you so much, Mitch, for that wonderful introduction, to Catherine, to Kathy, to Cecil, to Grace, to Erica for that reading, and that wonderful introduction as well of Dee's. And thanks everyone for being here. I was reminded in Mitch's introduction when you were talking about the World Bank. I'm just going to start with an anecdote and then actually do something useful. Written After a Massacre, I'm not going to read this poem, but there's this poem called I Explain a Few Things, which has lots of references to the World Bank and to the president, and to the head of the World Bank. I'll just read like 3 lines from it. It was the night after the president of the World Bank appeared on television to advertise a new sovereign state whose only currency would be cryptocurrency. The head of his lover was sealed in a jar, and he wanted the world to see her teeth. He showed us her smile. He said that when she smiles, a body in another part of the world feels joy, and that soon this will be the future. Other people will smile, and this will cause us to feel joy. Other people will control our feelings, and we will control the feelings of others. You will cry, and someone else will weep. By other people, he meant ghosts from dying villages whose names we can't pronounce. And the next day, the value of cryptocurrency skyrocketed, and we made tons of money, but had no idea where we could find it or how we could use it. I invented this country, said the president of the World Bank. We hardly have time to bury our dead. I invented this country and created revolutionary separatist groups to provide the illusion of tolerant democracy. I knew you when you were just a baby, said the president of the World Bank to his entire viewing audience, though it was the first time we had ever met. And several years ago, I gave a reading in Washington, D.C., and this guy comes up to me, and he had 2 books, and he said, and I read that poem, and he said, will you sign one for me and one for my boss? And I said, who's your boss? And he said, the president of the World Bank. And so I got to sign the book to the president of the World Bank, which I bet he devoured very, very quickly. Anyway, get started. So I'm going to read mostly without interruption, and as Kathy said, for like 30 minutes. I'm going to set a timer. Try not to go over that. So I'll be performing from a few different projects. Some will be from The Murmuring Grief of the Americas, a book that just came out in August. As the title demonstrates, it's thinking about an idea of what I'm calling hemispheric grief amid the violent continuums of state violence, immigration policy, and destructive economics. One piece that I will read is called Disaster Exposure, which is thinking about the intertwinement of financialization and natural disasters. As I wrote that piece, I was reading this kind of body of literature by finance scholars about whether or not their hedge funds' exposure to hurricanes and natural disasters was good for the hedge fund. It was written totally without any kind of irony. Short answer is yes, it is good for the hedge fund, and long answer is this is like all this technical stuff that I couldn't really understand. But I'll read then from a newer book that's called Pain Blank Book. The Pain Blank part takes its title from Emily Dickinson's poem, Pain Has an Element of Blank. And then the blank book part is a kind of imagining that goes throughout the book of a kind of artist's book that is entirely blank. There are words associated with the page numbers as you'll hear me read, but the words are sort of not really meant to be on the page. But beneath the page are represented by the page, and I have these sort of dreams of these sprawling books like hanging from the ceiling and stretching across the floor. There's a series of pieces called Systemic Change that's written in several parts. I'm kind of going to like mix the reading up, and all these pieces that were written together are going to get split and not read together, but I'll read some of the Systemic Change poems. The performance notes ask the performer to read each piece while improvising to the tune of a lullaby. I don't know why the author included that, but he did. I've been writing poems entirely in verbs. This started as some weird sort of grief exercise after the election, where I was like making lists as a way of coping. And I was reading lots of manifestos, and I was writing down those parts of speech, like nouns, making lists of nouns, adjectives, verbs. And as I read the Unabomber's manifesto, which is a really like uninteresting piece of writing, actually, I decided I was only interested in verbs. So I've been writing kind of formal poetry, which I don't normally do. Like I'm not going to read a sestina, but I read a sestina with the Unabomber's verbs. And then I am going to read the sonnet, 14-line sonnet with 10-syllable lines, only in verbs, and the project is kind of alphabetical, so the sonnet is like E, D through H, or something like that, of the verbs. I'm going to read these pieces called Grief Forms, which began as a kind of experimental translation response to César Vallejo's Trilce. One of the Grief Form poems uses language from the Joint Working Group for Non-Toxic Ammunition, which is an actual group formed in the 90s, and I'm not sure how long it lasted, that was a study group by the United States Army formed to eliminate the use of hazardous materials from small arms ammunitions. So we're really interested in eliminating the actual use of weapons, but of making sure that the ammo was nice and green. So, I'll start. Sustainable growth, number 205. What do you cost? What do you cost? How much are they willing to give you? How much are they willing to give you? What will you give them? What will you give them? What will you give them? What will you give? I'll give them my face, I need $6. I'll give them my hand, I need $5. My mouth is dead, I will give them something from my mouth. My mouth is dead, I need $27 for rice, eggs, bread, milk. I'll sell my metadata for $27. I'll sell you the metadata and the metadata of my metadata. What does my face cost? I need $7 for lunch. Metadata says I bought too many books about mental illness. What? What does my condition cost? I need to assess the metadata on my skin. How much for these knuckles? How much for these ankles? I will give them 34 hours a week. I'll give them 52 hours a week. I'll give them 312 hours a month. I'll give them 12, 8, 43, 15. Shh, don't need to go to a third party for my metadata. I'll sell you my password. HR8491 $what? They test my metadata for toxicity. I have too many assets in my portfolio, but I don't own any of them. The assets are bloody. The assets are untimely. The assets are drowning. I look for my body, but it's underwater. I look for my metadata, but it's underwater. I look for my value, but it's tied up in the metadata and my metadata. I look for time, but they tell me it's just a metaphor. I cannot interpret the metaphor unless I pay $46. So many names for what I owe. Is your face really a surveillance machine that can hijack refugee data? So many things to put in my mouth. I have wrapped my head in double-grade fabric designed to block signal detection, so many openings to fill with blank verse, so many holes, so many overpriced metaphors. I don't know where they put my body. Need less contaminated data, need more unwavering data, need more robust data, need to get the dead kids out of my data. I need $6 for lunch, $2 for the bus, $5 to make it through the purge today. I cost more than I used to cost and less than my neighbors cost. I need a more precise assessment of my social relations. My exchange value needs to be corroborated. I need to know the most profitable body part to invest in. My house is underwater. I need to find the bridge, the boat, the mouth, the dirt, the dollar. Judge says the state won't return my metadata until I can prove it won't be used for criminal activity. The value of my metadata is $400. I already paid $900 in court fees and still I can't get my data back. I meet with a lawyer who says he can help me get my data back. We'll need some ripe organs, he says. I only have one decent kidney. What about antibodies? The royalties on my antibodies were only $37 last year. He helps me unload some algorithms and I ask the judge to return my data, baby. Judge says, you'll need to rehumanize your face before I let you touch that stuff again. I go back to the bank. They say my face can be exchanged for the future metadata of poor kids in developing countries who will soon be middle class. A banker tests my body for redundancies. He sends me to the vault for an appraisal. They take my DNA and I sign some papers I don't understand, and the data analyst congratulates me. You're lucky, she says. You will always be human again. Blank book. On the first page, the word came down and disintegrated. The page was blank. An eternal darkness of wordlessness. Page 3, a voice inside another voice, a criminal voice with an unmistakably silent tone. Page 4, gunshots, the silence of the page. Page 5, we go back to bed as if there were no shots. Page 6, the shots of a voice. I can see it in the blank page. Page 7, cleaner, cleaner. Page 8, a man is found lying dead on the ground. Page 9, the page gets blanker and blanker. Heave, sonnet number 24117, D through H. Earn, encourage, eat, expose, fall, fear. Exploit, grow, get, forget, frustrate, engineer. Govern, hate, follow, flood, hunt, help, destroy. Engage, live, exploit, fiend, earn, lose, employ. Love, hunt, hate, hook, ignore, inflict, invite. Impede, enforce, establish, fight, grip, delight. Invest, invent, lose, include, join, love, fill, dominate, manipulate, fight, frustrate, kill. Interpret, evict, justify, enforce, expend, expect, hurt, divide, feed, divorce. Dream, disrupt, dream, forget, end, dismiss, evade. Dream, divide, dream, erect, exploit, expose, invade. Love, fear, know, hear, exclude, eviscerate. Heave, force, heave, hunt, expose, manipulate. Brief form number 1, green ammo. Che Guevara cologne has a woody and refreshing citric bouquet with subtle notes of talcum powder. Mickey Mouse House of Parfums fragrance is bergamot, coconut, vanilla, amber, and becomes creamier and milkier as the hours pass. There is a lemony uncertainty in the smell of my ineffable death drive. In this poem, there are refugees trying to escape through an absence that never existed. What is the difference between an absence that never existed and a presence that always existed? My favorite neighbor is the sand. It wants so little from me, it only wants to absorb my body. The bankers, the barbarians, and the oligophrenic play. Let's toss crumbs at the pigeons and name them after our favorite terrorist organizations. The Taliban pigeons tend to win, the CIA birds a close second. On Warzone Gourmet, the celebrity chef straps an automatic rifle around his neck as he eats roasted fish in the restaurant of a 92-year-old colleague, a veteran of 13 regional wars. At the bar, the intellectuals sing a song about a mythical insect who dies and comes back to life as a nuclear physicist drag queen. The theme of the performance is, the emergency is always beginning. Back home, the war came to my street and we built a garden for the children to play in. The vegetables were organic, the bullets were biodegradable. This poem was brought to you by the Joint Working Group for Non-Toxic Ammunition. If the negative health impacts associated with lead bullets are to be mitigated, non-toxic alternatives are needed. And there really was a Che Guevara cologne, which I think was outlawed in Cuba, actually, but it's funny because Che Guevara was known for smelling bad. Systemic Change, Sleep Song, number 1. A change in one system must be absorbed by a change in another. This verse you will always. A change in one system must be absorbed by this verse you will always remember. You took a breath and reminded yourself that authoritarianism is not the same as control. A change in one system must be absorbed by a change in another. This verse you will always remember. The skull melted beneath your feet and you did not expect the mustaches to sing. A change in one system must be absorbed by a change in another. You stepped into the bog and you wanted to control the mud, but you weren't prepared for the variables. A change in one system must be absorbed by a change in another. The regime of your private words has ended. The regime of your private words has gone public. This verse you will always remember. Disaster exposure. You ask him if his hedge fund has sufficient exposure to disaster, and he whispers, I could really use a hurricane to deliver superior fund performance. What do you see that other people cannot see? Everything in this poem is on the surface. There is no subtext or subtext to the subtext. The words only mean what I want them to mean. I'm not so interested in the imagination, and I am more than capable of exploiting disaster concerns to deliver superior fund performance. Tell the story a different way. Doctor says, patient cannot tell the difference between what he is and what he owes. Describe the aesthetics of the disaster. Every collapsing system is a poem in itself. Lucky for me, I am paid by the word to write them. You ask him if his disaster risk is heterogeneous, and he says, all you need is a touch of disaster exposure and you will see a beautiful increase in the returns on your fear premium. But seriously, boss, how bad does it have to be before we can call it a disaster? How broken does your body need to be before we can call it a disaster? He dithers, she dithers, they dither. This is dithering. Tell the story a different way. The interest in your body is the origin of the world. It all begins with the credit default swap, a complex financial product whose name sounds like a natural mineral. Baby, I love it when you say superior fund performance. Let's do some quick math on the quote-unquote back of this envelope. There are hundreds of lost bodies and thousands of lost limbs. Are they enough? The river is in the wrong place again. Is that enough? The highway is hanging from the mountains again. Is that enough? The mountains are covered with rooftops. The electric pole has been in the middle of the road for so long that people have confused it for a work of art. And the disaster that surrounds us is not really a disaster, and you begin with debt and you end with debt. And when there is no debt, you don't know what to do because all you have ever known is debt. Blank book. Chapter, here we are. Page 10, pigeon flesh. flesh of starving children. Page 11, the tranquility of the past, erosion of the blank page. Page 12, Artaud's voice in the blankness is unmistakable. Page 13, Exodus 3:21, ye shall not go, empty. Page 14, Deuteronomy 16:16, they shall not appear before the Lord, empty. Page 15, Ruth 1:21, the Lord hath brought me home again, empty. Page 16, Isaiah 24:1, behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty. Page 17, Mark 12:3, and they caught him and beat him and sent him away, empty. Systemic change, sleep song 5. It is possible that the system's precision can be replicated. A change in one system must be absorbed by a change in another. It's possible we can predict the exact time of the next massacre. This verse you will always remember. For most people, what a massacre does is more important than what a massacre is. For most people, what silence says is more important than what silence does. A change in one system must be absorbed by a change in another. It is possible that we can predict every note of a symphony that has yet to be written. This verse you will always remember. The system carried the perfect balance between routinization and innovation, between flexibility and improvisation. You took a breath and you reminded yourself that authoritarianism is not the same as control. A change in one system must be absorbed by a change in another. You stepped out into the bog and you wanted to control the mud, but you weren't prepared for all the variables. The system was so complex that we could not find even one simple word to describe its operations. I can tell how you're feeling from the way you hold your pencil. I can tell how you're feeling by the way you grip your shovel. There is digging, and there is conquest, and there is an overpowering objectivity, and there is wind in the particles it dusts us with. The system was so complex that we could not find even one simple word to describe its operations. This verse you will always remember. Waste, waste. From the Latin vastus, empty, desolate. To lose strength or health, to pine, to weaken, gastar, guastare, devastating, undergoing or causing decay or losing strength. Still, we must penetrate the muscular organ. To be abundantly fed, to be full or filled or abundantly provided for. Deuteronomy 28:22, the Lord will strike you with wasting disease and with fever, inflammation and fiery heat, and with drought and with blight and with mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish. Leviticus 26:16, I will bring terror on you, wasting disease and fever that will cause your eyes to fail and your life to ebb away. You will sow your seed in vain because your enemies will eat it. Job 16:8, it has come up as a witness against me, and the wasting of my flesh makes answer to my face. The question is simple. Why are you so sad? And why, when you are so sad, does your body feel as if it is decaying or losing strength? The hollow organ is filled with something shared between many breathers. Excuse me, is that a grenade in your muscular organ? A small bomb? Subdue the earth already, would you? I had a thought while penetrating your muscular organ. When was the very first massacre? When was the second massacre? Quote, a choking sensation, distress, anxiety, rain. Does the one thing feed the other? Or is the thing that holds us together only a means of extracting further information from a source or connecting one material body to another? A body of knowledge, or a knowledge of a body in pain. Pain, a word first articulated in the 14th century, connected to the word punishment, the opposite of pleasure, mental or emotional suffering, grief, distress, hell's torments. Here, kid, take this money as compensation for all the blood spilled in the previous centuries, retraction, or penalty, or retribution. He enjoyed the ways in which physical discomfort allowed for him to be able to access his most intimate thoughts and feelings. Or she had a healthy means of coping with her distress that in other bodies might have led to extreme depression or debilitation. an overwhelming bodily sensation induced by a nauseous stimulus, to accept it, to integrate it into one's daily life. Let us talk about a pulsing pressure upon naked nerve endings. Let us talk about the relationship between the state's bombs, the bank's money, and your body. What do you mean when you say your body knows best? What she means is that she holds the ability to distinguish between familiar sensations and unfamiliar ones, between shattering sensations and unshattering ones, between the entire physical structure of the human animal and the little bits of this and that which make life a little bit more or less worth living. Who said that, and what did they mean? I can scarcely distinguish what I am from what I owe. Incognito. Unknown, not investigated, a strange word in the silence of a beast, a breath, an inquiry, a moan, or a murmur. It's just that I can't sleep when my heart hurts. And when my heart hurts, I feel a disturbance, a distemper, an unnatural temper, a balance upset or disturbed. Was the phrase, quote, over my dead body, first written by Coleridge in his translation of a play by Schiller? Body politic, or body image, or body count, or body language, or body snatcher. No, monster, first over my dead body thou shalt treat. Grief form number 2, resurrection. A group of salivating bourgeois fathers in a Ford truck playing games like, what kind of bird am I? They droll out epic poems, and they're not as many vultures as you might think. Sparrows, horned streamers, New World quails. The father birds play Let's Give Birth with our mouths and sing pio, pio, pio until the cargo of almost dead things is loaded onto the truck with them. They sing, without our mouths, we would be unable to birth at all. And of course, these fine feathers make our birth stories so stylish. Thanks, first world lord puppy, for plooping so many eggs between our beaks and gums. They slide down a steep slope and look everywhere for their children. Consternation, trepidation, bewilderment. Have we been left on this road to rot? Or is our empty nest a mere historical accident? Press 1 or say resurrection for resurrection. Press 2 or say apocalypse for apocalypse. Press 3 or say account balance for your account balance. Press 4 or say silence for silence. Press 5 or say associate to be connected to one of our relatively unimpoverished third world customer service associates. Press 6 or say rest in peace to rest in peace with the bodies that die in your mouth. Blank book, chapter I see. Page 38. Someone is tracing a word along my body. Page 39, ants crawl through the letters. They go further than the word itself. Page 40, an apology of sorts. Page 41, in the blankness of the page there is a body with a mouth, and in the mouth there is a miniature bomb. The bomb does not want to be a bomb. Page 42, the bomb wants to be a parasite, says a voice in the blankness of the page. Page 43, I was meditating silently and trying to rid my head of all the voices. Page 44, failure. Furniture. Page 45, a series of secret codes are developed. Page 46, in the blankness, there's a giant chain of thousands of bodies. Page 47, write the blankness or collapse from exhaustion. Page 48, John 6:53, whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life. Page 49, Mark 6:3, isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son? Page 50. Page 51. There's a weird sort of etymological obsession going through these poems. I'll read just a couple more, and there's some of it in this one. Maintenance versus repair. What are the words? For 37 seconds I heard it die. The sound was green. Moly, from the phrase holy moly, has no etymology to speak of. The sonic disturbance was purple. He dislocated his gizmo, or what kind of gizmo is this? The goal is to introduce nothing into the conversation. Moly, M-O-L-Y, from the phrase holy moly, can also be spelled M-O-L-E-Y. The goal is to say nothing so that no one will ever ask you to do anything. No one knows the etymology of the word gizmo, which was apparently used for the first time in 1942. Who is Molly? The meaning of the sound was orange. I didn't know where the horrible sound came from. It damaged my eardrums. I was anxious and paranoid for years. What is the light? It fell onto our faces, got stuck in our voices. What a coincidence, he said. My fur child is also named Gizmo. Let's say that backwards. Is it a bell? What do they want with our ears? My favorite line in the poem is the one where she sits on the toilet and trims her toenails. They threw away the tools, or what is this tool? An agent decides how long to ring the bell. Every day is different. I cannot decipher the pattern. All I know is that he is clumsy and has no potential for love. True, the subcommittee has its own subcommitments, but they are not under or below their above ground commitments. The subcommittee is in reality much more important, i.e. above ground, than the committee it lies beneath. This is an apt incision stuck into a parenthetical exile. It wishes to introduce nothing into the conversation. Its underdevelopment is marginal. It can be read over and over again, or it can be overread under and under again. It can be passed over or overpassed. It fails the moment it introduces something you can put your hands on. Sometimes Kafka, my therapist, asks me to imagine bodies that have no actual shape, just as the mystics ask us to imagine music that has no sound. Objective is total eradication of fungus, or to puke out nothing for a bit longer. She described citizenship as a cage. Don't grunt, rather bite some chauvinists, lick some privatized face scabs. I really like to bake pizza, she said, but I never buy a pizza stone because I don't know where I'll be next year. He defined citizenship as a place of birth. What is the wrong way to speak? Someday the bell sounds only for 1 second. Other days it rings for several minutes. Every day is different. I can't decipher the pattern. I want to make pizza, she said, but I never buy flour because I don't know where I'll be next Tuesday. The shriek comes from inside of something, a belly, a throat, a coffin. The voice said, insert your CVS extra care card into my arteries. Another boring story about a baby kidnapped by the military and reunited 40 years later with her mother. Sex with me is like a bandage, he said. When it gets wet, it falls apart. What is the wrong way to speak? The goal is to introduce nothing into the culture. The goal is suitable. First, form your signature with numbers or walk towards the sign that says, exit, but don't leave. The carbuncular young Marxists in my life insist on solidifying the distinction between maintenance and repair. The poem begins swiftly. A man walks into a shower unsure of whether or not he is going to turn on the water or blow his brains out. I understand you have theories. My mouth is sorry. I breathe like it's going out of style. When I was younger, the most determinate forces in my life were guilt and ambition. Ergo, some people have rights and some people don't. Some people value X rights over Y rights. Some people think your rights should be disentangled from my rights, or that your rights should be disentangled from the nation state. No one can solve the problem of local custom vis-a-vis universality. The punchline is, I can barely wipe my ass for $13,000. The older I get, the less guilty I feel. At the same time, the older I get, the less ambition I feel. What is the connection between guilt and ambition? I get an email that says, I don't blame you. You should know I don't blame you, but my husband read all of your poems before he tried to kill himself. He quoted your poems in his suicide note. The goal is to introduce nothing into the culture. I don't blame you, she writes, but I thought you might want to know this. And I'll end with this last piece, which is kind of retelling of the Abraham and Isaac story. Or for Isaac. And he took his father to the flame, and his father said, I am not a goat. And the boy said, no, you are not a goat. And the father said, where are the goats? And the boy said, you are a goat today, or you will be a goat. The father thought about hybrid beasts and said nothing. He looked with love at the strange child he created. He thought about how hard it had been to keep the boy alive. And when the boy led him down the death path, he kept thinking, I should be in charge. But I'm tired, and I can't do anything to gain control. I'm crinkled, worn out, sick of seeing. Things get destroyed in my name. Do I mind that I might be turned into someone else's burden? Also, I admire my son's determination. Someone, the voice of X, told him to take me to the flame. Someone serious, a credible character, told him to take me to the flame. It would have been perfectly reasonable to resist, to say, look, son, this is not the kind of thing you should do to your father. But I was tired, and the child was persistent, and I wondered, how long will this thing go on? It's true, I am old now. I don't actually want to live that much longer. But there are a few more things I have to do. Is it presumptuous to say there is a future that depends on me? The earth has its own ideas, the sea has other ideas, and the sky has ideas. There are just a few bodies falling from the sky today. I think I recognize some of them. They are my children, and one of them whispers to me, this is not the right way to live. And to live in the wrong way is to die in the wrong way. Before he takes me to the flame, I tell my son, there is nothing left to do here on earth. I welcome the pain and I welcome my son's audacity. I admire his fingers as they grip my shirt sleeve. In those fingers I feel sadness, tenacity, anger, hope. I feel the violence of the centuries filling up in his blood. I know how lonely it is in his body. The expectations of our people are extraordinary. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Daniel, for that wonderful reading. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. Catherine will come around with the microphone, so please raise your hand.
I have a question. Thank you. Thank you for the reading, Daniel. I was thinking, I think I've heard you sing during a reading before, but this was the first time with that, and then the sort of meter verb sonnet thing that you did as well. And it made me think a lot about how prosy your writing normally is, or has been for the past few books. And I guess I just sort of wanted to ask you about your relationship between prose and more lyric passages or meter in your work, and whether you think about that or not. Does that make sense?
The relationship between prose and is the question sort of like why I'm doing more metery, songy things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of where it came from, but I wanted to make it sound smarter, I guess.
I will only take the question if you make it sound as not smart as possible. I don't know. I mean, I think the metered stuff with the verbs and the very use of constrained form seems like a sort of extreme adaptation of the extreme form of only using verbs. And so I don't think I've ever written a sonnet before in counting syllables. And so I feel like there was some sense of, I don't know, comfort in like multiplying the constraints on top of the constraints. This, I don't know what to say about the singing other than I've been sort of like inserting ridiculous performance notes into. I've been reading I was reading a lot of Jackson McClough earlier this year, and that was part of what was going on a little bit. But I was just thinking about performativity a lot and trying to imagine that I would not be the reader of the pieces, and that there might be some something interesting about kind of planting performance notes or thinking of them as theater pieces for other people to read, and so that was a little bit of what's happening there.
Thank you.
I think it's now more. I guess I can, yeah, okay, thank you. Are you the owner, not, I'm asking you a question. Are you, the owner of East Bay Books? Is it you?
No.
Okay, never mind. I thought that maybe it could be like a good connection, but something that I remember, and Erica alluded to this, when you read that time, was like, there were like 2 kids there, and I think your own kid was at that reading. And
Yes,
there
one
was,
of them was mine. Yes.
yeah, and then Tango's kid was also there. And I'm curious just about like your relation, how like poetry relates to your pedagogy or the teaching.
Not to my 3-year-old or to my 3-year-old.
No, like to your students. I was just thinking about kids' legacy, what you leave behind, getting older, evolving, like, I don't know, thinking about that. Especially with your last poem, which is so beautiful.
I think, I think I'm trying to, I can think about ways in which I sort of teach poetry, but the question is more like, how does poetry affect my pedagogy? I think there's a bunch of ways, especially in terms of like thinking about the like ability of students, not even necessarily in poetry classes, but to be allowed to be poetic and to also be allowed to fail. And to kind of think about teaching as like a place where the ultimate goal is somehow to like not build some perfect thing, but to allow for a kind of improvisation and vulnerability. And so I think that's one way. And even as I was sort of reading, I've kind of improvising among the work as well. So I think there's, that's a way that I would answer it in part. I think I'm like, in terms of like poetry pedagogy, I am very suspicious of like workshop poetry pedagogy, and I try to do as little of it in a certain sense as possible, and try to kind of think about, rather than building spaces to tell people what's wrong with their work, which is often what I feel like poetry workshops can do, but rather to like build spaces where they are seeing possibilities for how to make work, and I'm often kind of writing along with them and trying to sort of share my own drafts and in-progress things, and trying to also just get students sort of outside of like the model of literary publishing. And so I don't know, I just finished teaching a graduate workshop where the students had final projects and they had to do something with film or video or make books, and they were really amazing. Like a student who hates paper. This is incredible. She told me that she hates paper, and made made a book in cloth with poems stitched into the cloth. And of course, there's sort of not like a market value for that, but it, like, on the one hand, solved a sort of practical problem and was totally beautiful at the same time. Like somehow trying to lead them to doing things that I couldn't even imagine. Kathy. Oh, sorry.
I'm impressed with the musicality of your performance, your poems. I'm hearing them for the first time, and I find that sort of really makes it memorable for me. I'm sort of wanting to know what musical background you have, how that has affected you, something about that maybe.
I played the trumpet from the 3rd grade to the 6th grade. I played the saxophone when I was like 17 till I was about 23, and was never very good at it, but really liked music, and really liked jazz, and spent a lot of time going to improvisational jazz shows in Chicago, and that's kind of it. I think that's it. Kathy.
What I find really impressive about your poetry is how you kind of tackle the subjects of financialization head on in poetry, in the lyric form, which I think is really difficult for people to do unless they're using it, they're doing it more from the personal experience. But to use the sources that you do is really quite tricky for people. And I'm just wondering how that translates also to teaching. Like, how do you, like, do you talk about questions of power in poetry? Does it translate to, like, prompts you give to your poets? Like, I'm just wondering, like, what connections there are between the subject matter that you're interested in, which is capital, and what it does to the human body, and the classroom.
I mean, in a very real way, students have no problem understanding debt. And have really never been given the chance to write about it or to think about it as at least as poetic content, or perhaps even as kind of formative content. Before teaching at the University of Illinois in Chicago, I taught at community college in Chicago, and so I've always taught very working class kids, and so I don't think it's like, I'm sort of reducing it not so much to financialization, but to debt, which I think is at its core like the thing that I have been really interested in over the past couple of years. And I don't know, I find that it's actually not a hard thing to write about for students, but also to then begin to kind of take it apart and to think about like actual numbers, I think is a really interesting project, and one that students appreciate. In some ways don't even have to do it about themselves, and can do it about kind of institutional subjects, nations, corporations, whatever. And then, but the other thing that I think is, I kind of repeated some version of a line about how you are what you owe, and the entanglements of debt and identity. And again, I feel like that's, on the one hand, such a kind of obvious thing, and on the other hand, such a thing like we don't have a space for discussing, or that debt is normally associated with shame. And so what happens if we sort of try to like remove the idea that debt is shameful and is instead this thing that we are all somehow both circulating in and identified by, and it's not to say that like writing about it gives you some power over it, but at least it, if there is like a pedagogical hope, it is to take away the idea of the interconnections between debt, poverty, and shame somehow.
But
so,
you invite them to write about it as a subject.
Yeah.
You know? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, to write about it, to write about how much money they make, how much money they think they make versus what their fellow co-workers make, to write about how much I don't know, and like convert a kind of budget into a poem, and to try to sort of figure out that. So that's like one level. The other level to the question is to like try to see that there is a poetics to non-poetic language, and that's the part that I have been interested in for a really long time, and I really like the awkwardness of using sort of technical, economic, financial language, in part because it's non-poetic, and to kind of think that poetry doesn't have to be this thing that that is somehow like trying to write about beautiful things, or trying to write about mystical things, or things that are like outside of, on the one hand, like the daily experience of their life, but on the other hand, to like expand what the daily experience of their life is. And I think that's a lot of what I'm thinking about.
I had a question about
Sure.
your poetry from Blank Book. So the first poetry I think I read by you was from the Book of Interfering Bodies, and your poetry from Blank Book was making me think about just the various names of the books in the Book of the poems in the Book of Interfering Bodies, and I was thinking about the Book of Non-Writing, where you're talking about the inability to document, the inability to even sort of access or read the page, and that it's more of a fleshy body experience than it is actually like sort of like reading as a cognitive activity. And I was just curious, with Blank Book and just your previous work, how are you thinking differently perhaps about books? What is blankness meaning for you? Whereas like you before you would say things, or like some of the poems, it's about non-writing, it's about holes, it's about, yeah, so I was, so whichever way you want to go with that question, I want to be generous with that. So.
Thank you. No, it's a really good question, and you're like, and so I mean, I've often like thought of my own work as all being one kind of big book, and that they're not sort of separate books or separate projects. And what is really funny about that is I hadn't even thought about the Book of Interfering Bodies and all of those books in relationship to this Blank Book project, and so now I just feel like I have further evidence that I've only cared about the same three things for all of my writing life and keep going back to it. So I don't know what I was thinking about in 2008 or whatever, 10, when I wrote that. I mean, obviously I was thinking about, like, in many ways actually what I'm thinking about now, which is like the book as material object. And I think now it's sort of changed in that I'm sort of thinking about like what the purpose of a book is in a digital age, and I don't mean that like to evoke a sort of romantic idea of the book's value, but more like we certainly don't need books, but like we don't have a lot of like poets aren't like thinking about the evolution of the book. Instead, they're like freaking out about AI and how it's going to replace them, rather than like thinking about like how the book can actually evolve. And so I don't know. I've been really sort of over the last year thinking a lot about artist books and thinking about somehow trying. I was talking with Devin earlier today about this, about what would it look like to be able to kind of mass produce a kind of artist book, to sort of think that books can have multiple inflections, that books are like multi-dimensional, and so I've just been thinking a lot about the physicality of the book, and I have some time off from teaching in the coming year, and the thing that I think I will devote that time to is to actually just like making handmade books and making chapbooks and like mailing them out, and getting back to some place of outsideness as well. And so that's what I've been thinking about lately, is just like, on the one hand, like the technology of the book, but also like how to be more present in the, how to make books which have more of a physical presence, and to think about that very consciously as a way of, I don't know, getting to a different kind of publishing. Yeah.
As someone who is a translator in addition to a poet, I was wondering, like, about who also reads financial treatises on the side. I was wondering, how do you think about financial language, which is a language that's intentionally deceptive and unintelligible, and how does that relate to your work as a translator? And also just kind of from a craft standpoint, like what are your personal rules for writing poetry with financial language?
I don't know that I have, what do you mean by personal rules?
Like, do you try to use it in a way that's not deceptive, or do you just kind of like choose phrases that you think are like interesting? How do you work with it, I guess?
That's a very interesting question. I never thought about it in terms of like the sort of boundaries I put around it. I think it often, especially when I want to, when I'm starting to write something, I will often try to research something I know nothing about, and in a certain way, like research it for the point of language, and research it as a tool for both, learn whatever, trying to understand something about, say, financialization, but also as a way of gaining vocabulary. So I don't know if I can answer the question about rules. I don't know that there's anything particularly disciplined about it. But I think it is, I want to say for it to be interesting, it has to be sonically interesting first, or rhythmically interesting, or performatively interesting as a poem before it can actually matter to anybody as subject matter. So I think that's maybe a starting point. And then the other question was about kind of how that relates to translation. Is that right? Again, kind of, most of the poets I have translated have been from Chile and have written between 1973 and now, and their lives have been very much informed and determined by neoliberal capital and its intersections with authoritarian violence. And so, in a certain sense, it comes very easily, or it translates very easily. And I think one of the things that translation sort of helped me to see was the ways in which the end goal of the Chicago Boys, Chile was the starting place, but the end goal was Chicago. The end goal was to like bring the kind of privatization and neoliberal structures to at least urban centers in the US, and they did that, and that happened very successfully. So, I've written a lot about sort of period of 2012 when there were joint education strikes in Chile and in Chicago, and in a certain sense the issues were the same. They were about the privatization of public schools, and in Chile, public schools. Most people, there are some public elementary and high schools, but there are not many, and most people end up sending their kids to private schools and taking out loans to do it if they can't afford to. And so, here we go into debt to pay for university. There are people who are going into debt to pay for middle and elementary school. But like the end product of those two labor strikes, or what they were arguing against. In Chicago in 2012-13, the mayor ended up closing 50 public schools and replacing some of them with charter schools. And in Chile, this has been a long-standing issue since the beginning of the dictatorship. So I think translation has in many ways allowed me to kind of see the interrelationship between the economics and also the intersection between economic and state violence as well, right? Because in Chile it's very obvious how state violence was used to uphold that system, and in Chicago I think we can say the same thing is true, that brown and black communities are policed and abused by the police to a much greater degree, and at the same time denied the kind of public services through privatization that are analogous, I don't want to say the same, but analogous to what would be happening in Chile.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have. Let's give a round of applause.